8 years ago when I was doing panels about neurodivergency in comic books and creators and people of color. It was a small room and we had very little people. So I'm just so happy and so amazed and I'm so thankful. You guys for the feedback. I'm so appreciative and I'm so thankful. So thank you guys so much.
So in the interest of being polite to our more sensitive folks, what they do at my kids' school, I think it's awesome, is instead of applause, do this, which it might be sign language, I don't know, it's what they do. It's what they do in second grade at my kids' school. I want to echo Lorraine's comments and thank everybody for being here. We're going to take a minute while we're just setting up the tech, but I'm going to get started with a few things. First, I speak very quickly. I'm very sorry. I can't help it. I was born and raised in New Jersey, and it's just the way it works out there. But the good news is, if you are interested in a lot of the things that get talked about in this panel, I have a pretty comprehensive deck that I will make available to you if you will email me. My email address will be on the last panel on the screen at the end of the day. My name is Britton Payne, and my email is brittonpayne@paramount.com. I work at Paramount. I'm an attorney working for Nickelodeon, but nothing I say has anything to do with Nickelodeon or Paramount. They know I'm here, and that's about it. So I do not represent Nickelodeon. I'm not speaking on their behalf. I'm speaking separately as an individual person. Also, I recognize there's disagreement within the autistic community about terminology. There are a lot of different ways that people used to talk about autism and presently talk about autism, and there's not even consensus agreements about it. So I refer to people as autistic people a lot in this piece, in this presentation, because that's what, as opposed to a person with autism, because autistic person is what my experiences have shown that people who are autistic adults prefer. But I'm not trying, I apologize to the extent that that causes anybody discomfort, and I just want you to know that I and everybody else, I think we're all just doing our best. And then we're going to talk a lot about depictions of autism in comic books, as you can imagine, in a panel that is called Autism in Comic Books, many of which are old-timey and some of which are upsetting or inappropriate. And I just want to give everybody the heads up that we are aware that some of these are inappropriate. Even people who had good intentions 50 years ago don't necessarily have a modern understanding of what autism is, and so you consider yourself forewarned. So I want to just do a super quick brief history of autism, and part of the reason that this panel exists. The current CDC estimates for autism in kids is 1 in 36. There's the truism, of course, that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. That's part of how the spectrum has ended up presenting itself. The first appearance in literature was in about 1911, although it didn't really have the same meaning that we think of autism as having today. A lot of people say that Bartleby the Scrivener, which a lot of you probably read in high school, to the extent that you're out of high school, had a non-explicit depiction of a presumptively autistic character. And the first explicit depiction in film was a 1969 movie called Change of Habits, starring Elvis and Mary Tyler Moore. And it is not a great piece of work. It is Elvis's last movie of that style especially, but the depiction is, not too bad given that it was 1969. It was a little girl who was diagnosed, they thought she might be deaf, and it turned out that Mary Tyler Moore thought she might be autistic. The fact that Elvis cured her autism with a wink, it was cute, I guess, he is Elvis. Okay, so autism was redefined by the DSM in the 2000s to include other similar and related categories. The term that we no longer use, Asperger's syndrome, was folded into autism. And the current definition is that autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a neurological and developmental disorder that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and behave. It's known as a spectrum disorder because there is a wide variation in the type and severity of symptoms that people experience. However, bear in mind, as many of you probably already know, that this definition of autism is not universally embraced. When we think about autism in culture, some of the more common points of reference for people who are not particularly attuned to the autism community would be The Good Doctor or Rain Man. There was a show called Atypical, which was a really fun show. And then Mason from Ada Twist Scientist's kids cartoon, Julia from Sesame Street. It was, the Sesame Street we're all thinking about. The TV show Everything's Gonna Be Okay, which was created by an autistic creator and has 2 autistic characters in the leads, including Kayla Cromer, who also appeared in The Good Doctor more recently. But ultimately, autistic characters have not appeared very much in comics. There are thousands of comic book characters. Only about 30 are explicitly autistic. I'm welcome to finding more, but that I may have missed, so please reach out. Every time I do this presentation, somebody seems to know some character that slipped through the cracks for me. So representation is obviously very important for the 1 in 36, but my particular concern is the 35 and 36, who need to be taught explicitly how to interact with their peers who are different from them, with their autistic peers. And it's hard to teach that in schools, it's hard to teach that in family if you don't have experience with autism. And I think that our pop culture can be an effective way of helping neurotypical kids understand what autism is at a very young age, in an age-appropriate manner, so that they can interact with their neurotypical, or with their peers who are different from them. It's them who needs to change. You know, the autistic kids have done plenty of changing over the last couple of generations. Maybe it's time that the neurotypical kids learn how to change and grow and become more empathetic. So I happen to think that comic books are a particularly good medium for this. But in talking about kids in schools and representations of autism and the impact that that can have, I'd like to start with introducing Lorran Garrison, who's a school psychologist and also is the publisher and writer of several books under Little Brainstorm. So I wanted to start, Lorran, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience first as a school psychologist and the impact of pop culture, particularly comic books, on the kids that you see and that you interact with all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Britt, for having us here, and thank you again, Comic-Con, for having us. And thank you, everyone who has showed up, and I'm so, like I said in the beginning, I'm so grateful and thankful that this is a subject that is near and dear to everybody's heart. Once again, my name is Lorran Garrison. I'm a school psychologist here in California. I worked in San Diego, and now I'm up in Northern California. And as a school psychologist, I find it very important that we advocate on behalf of our children, and I work very closely with parents, and the word autism, how we look at it and how we look at it, and our minds have changed around it. Language is consistently changing. And when I was first in school, it was always first person. It was a person with autism as opposed to, an autistic person. And the reason being, if some of you are new to this idea, is that, autism is not an accessory or a curse or anything like that. So language is ever changing. The word neurodivergency actually came from an Australian sociologist, and it was primarily to talk about the autistic community. And so people who have ADHD, sometimes there's a combination of autism and ADHD, and so now the word neurodivergency, neurodivergent, it's a big umbrella term that will encompass everything that includes anything from ADHD, specific learning disabilities, dyslexia, any of those now. As Britt was saying, in 2020, the CDC has found that 1 in 3 8-year-olds have autism, which is a huge change from 2018. In 2018, it was 1 in 44. So is this, a trend that we're able to capture more children now? Because before, we could only test as early as 8-year-olds. Now there's testing out there that we can test as early to 2 to 3-year-olds. So it's very interesting to see how we're able to gather more data and understand that the autistic community is not a monolith. We're not all Rain Man or anything like that. And I think that's very important to find representation in comic books, in pop culture, so that we can relate and we can be more humanizing towards this entire community. Let's see, what else can I talk about?
That was a good start.
Okay.
So now you've decided to create your own works that
Yes.
address these issues, sometimes with autism, sometimes with a broader form of neurodiversity.
Yes.
How did you choose comics?
I chose comics because a lot of the children I work with, and even myself, I learned how to read through comic books. I remember the first comic book I read was a Batman. Batman and Mr. Freeze, like 1980 something or another. I know it ages me, but it was a great comic book. So I didn't find any comic books that really addressed the social issues of, okay, we can make friends, but what if someone communicates differently than the rest of us? And I found that also while working in schools, how our character, oh, you put a little thing, that's cute. So our character, thank you. Our character Bob Bob was doing like this crazy test one day, and his he couldn't stand it. And how many of us have test anxiety? So our character, Brain Boy, pops out of his head and is his own character now. And sometimes with the experience of ADHD, I'll ask my students or even myself, why did I do that? I don't know. Just happened. Why did you, I have kids I work with, why'd you hit that kid? I don't know. And that's a legitimate question, and it's not because the kid's bad or anything like that. It just could be, it was because the kid was impulsive or something. And I want to honor that. I want to honor that lived experience. And so that is where we created Brain Boy and Bob, and we have a whole series of that. This is the origin story of Brain Boy and Bob, very hungry maggot as a take on the very hungry caterpillar. And first day of school jitters, this is some anxiety helping building. And Ghosts in the Maze is about helping children work together. And it's a maze book as well. So thank you, Britt.
Yeah. And then one last quickie. In short, or to the extent that we can be short just because we have a lot of stuff to squeeze in.
Yes.
How would you describe the benefit that you might see from your neurotypical students as they become better able to interact with their autistic peers?
Yes, specifically with autism. So there are a lot of studies out there with corporations, with adult studies, children's studies, that the more diverse we have in a community, the better we can learn and think outside of the box, problem solve. There's a lot of studies with that. And I think it's very important that for neurotypical children who are not on any kind of spectrum or anything like that, understand how to communicate with people who we may not expect to communicate like us. And in that way, it makes the neurotypical person to really think outside of the box, to really become more creative in thinking, in problem solving, like I said before. I think it's really important in that way.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much. I feel like comic books are a particularly good medium for this. I want to show you an early example of autism appearing in comic books in a really coded way. This is an ad from 1966 in Metal Men that describes the invisible handicap. Now, it's particularly ham-fisted, as you would expect a comic book from 1966 to be, but it's also good-hearted, and they're trying. And so I want to just jump a little bit to why comic books in particular are a good medium. There's a low barrier to entry for creation. Anybody can create it. It's a low cost for your cast, your location, your special effects. If your story involves an explosion in space, you just draw it. All you need is a pencil. Thought balloons and speech bubbles differentiate inner life and outer expression, which I think exists for everybody. But in particular in the autism community, there sometimes is a disconnect between those two things, and seeing it spelled out in the visual language of comic books happens to fit really naturally. The reader controls the pace. If I'm talking about how my New Jersey patter is very, very fast, if you're watching a movie, you don't have the opportunity to slow it down. In a comic book, you can control the pace in which you absorb the story. The ubiquity and ease of access, they can be, and in a lot of cases are, everywhere. And they are easy to read, that's the point. And the quick turnaround allows comics to capture trends. Lorran was just talking about how language evolves really quickly. Well, that means that if there is some new thing, like yesterday's SpongeBob coming out as autistic, the quick turnaround allows comics to capture trends. So the characters who are autistic, who have characters, and some characters have been claimed as autistish. That's not really exactly where I'm leaning, because part of what I wanted to do is draw a box around what can I talk about. So I'm sticking with people who have been explicitly autistic, and some of them have problematic depictions, as you can imagine, and I'm about to show you, but I do believe they can be rescued. The big ones are the adventure comics from the big name comics, right? Why do we care specifically about Marvel and DC? Frankly, because they have the broadest reach and the most resources. If you can get an autistic character into a DC Comics comic book, it's going to get into more hands than in a smaller publisher. Even if the smaller publisher has a more robust character or a more prominent character or a better depiction, it's still really important to get him into the big books. And one big character is Black Manta. So he was created in 1967. He was born to conquer, which is the most generic origins, I guess. But there we go. And he's generally an undersea mercenary. He's he is an Aquaman archenemy, and he occasionally does the right thing. Over time, he's become more of like a Punisher anti-hero. Sometimes he does the right thing, sometimes he doesn't. He was revealed to be black. That was not part of the original plan, as far as I know, but some creator in the sort of relevant era was like, oh, you know, he's called Black Manta, let's make him black. Okay, so there we go. And he appeared in the Super Friends Legion of Doom, which is where I got to know him with that gurgling voice effect. If you're exactly my age, that's probably very important to you. And he was in the 2018 Aquaman movie, where they did a brilliant job translating his incredibly ridiculous costume to something that looked awesome in live action. So in 2003, in Aquaman number 8, Rick Veitch and Yvette Duché revealed that as his origin, it had never been told, and they decided that he was autistic and that he had been treated badly in the therapies. He found that cotton sheets burned his skin basically, but that the water made him feel free. And then, of course, he got injected with such and such, and they cured his autism. So please, that's you know, okay, so the start was bad and then it got worse. But the point is, he is canonically has autism in his history. So rather than say, that was a bad depiction of autism, let's erase it from his story. Let's keep it. Let's keep it and make it a better depiction of autism in a superhero character. Because that's how, there's so few, we can't afford to throw any away, but we can't afford to fix them. We can't afford to make noise and say, if Black Manta is going to be autistic, then maybe you should have an autistic consultant to the writer, or maybe even the writer himself or herself should be, or themselves, should be autistic. He is the only, when I printed this panel, he was the only autistic DC character I could find. There is one more, but it's super, super teeny tiny. We'll get to it later. The big one that's exciting, I think, is Reed Richards' Mr. Fantastic. So he was created in 1961. He was partly inspired by the Justice League and Challengers of the Unknown, and of course he was co-created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. He's always been Mr. Super Smart and the leader of this team. In 2001, Greg Morrison obliquely suggested in Fantastic Four 1, 2, 3, 4 that Sue was like, maybe you want to look into this. And then 10 years later, in Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa's David Marquez's story in 2012, he said, oh, I hate this line so much, but I'm going to say it out loud. He has a self-diagnosed, a mild case of autism for which he is inventing a cure. So I just want to point out, not everybody in the autism community thinks that autism needs a cure. But, you know, okay, it's out there. But what is a good presentation is this current writer of Fantastic Four, Ryan North, has confirmed he is writing Reed as autistic. So it's not explicit in the comics yet that I've seen, but it is explicit in the world around the comics. And so I'm including it, and I'm making noise about it because it would be lovely to see Reed Richards as canonically accepted as autistic in the comics, and I guess in movies and TV shows and stuff like that, but I care more about the comics. And in particular, this book was nice because it's an adventure book, and he is autistic. When you read the captions of the things that he says and the things that Sue says about him, you can say, oh yeah, okay, that would make sense. This is an autistic character. This particular issue where it's narrated and it becomes very clear, they're on a date and they're having a lovely time, and you get this sense of this loving couple. One of them is autistic, which is not always the representation of autism in pop culture. And so it's really nice to see a neurotypical woman has fallen in love with an autistic person. And then it turns out everybody in the town is actually a doom bot. So it's still an adventure, you know, it's not just a romance story. And adventure is a really important part of it. So those are two of the sort of the big characters. There are also autistic characters who have appeared on teams over time. So this next one's a weird one. Johnny Dew in the Marvel New Universe, which was sort of a spin-off universe in the late 80s, they threw a lot of spaghetti at the wall just to see what happened. So this kid was being mistreated in a Russian whatever, and he gets rescued by military, whatever. But he's got fire powers, and so he's kind of dangerous. And people are having a hard time connecting with him. And this one soldier, this redheaded soldier, who likes to run around in his underwear because it's the late 80s, decides that he is going to try and help this kid. There's something about this kid that makes him want to try and reach out and understand him, and not let him just be confused. So even in the middle of this high-octane, like, blast through walls and fire all over the place and beating up Russians and whatnot, there's still an opportunity within an adventure story to have one of the relationships that we care about be that between an adult, neurotypical adult, and an autistic kid, trying to make that connection. And so it may be ham-fisted, it may be awkward, but it's there. It's there, and it's got a good heart. So those are the kinds of depictions, they're so rare that we have to maybe grab onto. I don't know that character is ever coming back, but I do like that the author made a concerted effort, and this was a long time ago. Another adventure character is Emma from Jade Street Protection Services. It's sort of a Harry Potter-ish situation where these young women are students at a high school,
And this is a nonverbal autistic character who is the omniscient narrator of at least parts of the book, if I remember right, all of the book. So it centers the autistic character in a way that most autistic representations of autistic characters don't do. It's usually a neurotypical person's story as they interact with an autistic person. In this case, we get to know what her inner thoughts are, and then her friends, who are, you know, the snotty one and the jockey one and the angry one and the weird one, and whatever, you know, your typical stereotypes of high school characters, interact with her. And we get this modeling that I think is so important to see how the different kids interact with her. And the one who takes the time to interact with her realizes that she communicates by text. Just because she doesn't have a verbal language doesn't mean that she's non-verbal at all, or non-language. And then we get to see, you know, the way she's drawn is differentiated from the other characters. It really seems like the author did their work in presenting an autistic character. And in fact, the editor of the book is autistic and has written other books, and that helps make for a more thoughtful presentation. So even if you're a neurotypical writer, but I think even if you're an autistic writer and you decide to incorporate an autistic character, you ought to try and maybe get other people's perspectives as well, because as we talked about, not every autistic person presents the same way. They show stimming, they show self-regulation, they show internal monologue being different than the way she speaks out loud. It's a fun depiction in that kind of a story. A terrific one is Maddie from Mighty Jack. It's for young kids, and the setup, it's Jack and the Beanstalk, but set in modern times. This kid, Jack, has to babysit his little sister over the summer while mom's off at work, and then of course there's Beanstalk and adventures and stuff like that. Maddie, who is also nonverbal, ends up, her impulsiveness, which is sometimes a part of her presentation of autism, propels the story forward. That's why the beans get bought instead of the groceries he was supposed to get or whatever. And then when they get into the other world on the other side of the beanstalk, there's a huge dragon that I think might be a vegetable dragon, I'm really not sure. But the vegetable dragon can talk to the girl somehow, has some kind of connection with the girl, and can sort of say her thoughts. In other words, it's a mystical version of an AC device, of a communication device in fantasy. What's nice about this particular depiction, it doesn't magically cure her non-ability to speak, you know, the way the language would sometimes go. It says she is still herself. She still functions the way that she functions, but accommodations, even that are magical accommodations, can help her move her way through the world. A big one is Monet St. Croix from Generation X. So there is a sliver of people of a particular age who read all the X-Men books at that time who will much better describe how this works, because she's part of like two younger twins who can combine together to become this adult who sometimes acts quirky and sometimes doesn't. And the Beast, as you can see, diagnoses her as autistic. This is from the mid-90s, and there are twins that either live within her or don't live within her, I'm not really sure. But one of the twins is autistic and one is not. And so in this book, you can see that the artist has taken care to present the body language of the characters as being different, to differentiate them. And you may find out ham-fisted, but it is something to consider if you're creating an autistic character, that you should also take into consideration that people move differently, people behave differently, just like everybody else. Not everybody looks exactly the same, not everybody moves exactly the same. If you take into consideration that for an autistic character, it opens up your mind to take it into consideration for everybody. So sometimes the autistic character is in a lead in an adventure book, and a great example of that is Mark Schifrin from Poster. It's sort of post-apocalyptic, and the central character is this guy Mark, who's autistic, and you get a good sense of what's going on in his mind. I'm going to kind of blaze through that because we're moving on time a little bit, but it's a pretty interesting depiction, particularly if you like post-apocalyptic works. And the author specifically wanted to avoid the autism as superpower cliche. So sometimes that's useful, right? Sometimes we want to be inspiring, but also sometimes we want to show that there are obstacles in the world that different people have to confront, and that can be compelling drama. So some of that is what's going on with Mark. He's trying to figure out how to operate in the world. To me, he feels like a pretty real depiction of an autistic person, in that some people are kind to him, and some people bully him, but we do get to see the modeling of the kindnesses from some of the people around him. It also presents this notion of metaphors for autism. So a lot of times neurotypical people won't necessarily understand what autism is. Somebody has to explicitly teach them, and because it's not something you're born knowing. So sometimes the metaphors that autistic people have presented about what their experience of being autistic is like can be reflected in the works that they read. So in this case, he's described it as a world of constant noise. He described it as a million blinking lights. Another character is Rosa Reyes from FDP. So this is a typical buddy cop situation. And so the Rosa Reyes is specifically autistic. She's tough as nails, special agent, blah, blah, blah. And she gets paired up with this guy with the baseball hat, who you can tell his whole personality just from the drawing. So he is initially, not down with her because she's odd and she's different from him. And then he, over time, gets to appreciate her and understand the value of connecting with her and ends up really liking her quite a bit. It is cool to see that journey. It is unfortunate but necessary, I think, that it has to start from a place where you have an ignorant character doing dumb ignorant things that have to get presented. Because that's how if you don't see that part, then you don't get the journey of how this is done. Because another thing that needs to be modeled is for autistic, or for neurotypical people who have unkind thoughts to understand how to get past them and still recognize they're a person, they're not being thrown away, they're not being, canceled, or however you want to perceive it. People need room to make mistakes. And this book sort of demonstrates that in a crass way. It's like, oh, he's probably worse than most of the people who would read it, but nonetheless, he's creating this room for this path for getting towards being a better and more well-rounded person, in part because you're able to interact with people who are different from you, and he gets to change a little bit because of that. Her metaphor about what it feels like to be autistic in an unaccommodating world actually happens in, it's not exactly a dream sequence, it's a dream sequence, I don't exactly remember, but it's a non-reality. And she described it as, have you ever been to a party, and the moment you walk through that door, something inside of you clicks, and no matter how much or how hard you try, you just don't feel like you fit? It's like you're watching a movie of yourself playing out, and you're out of sync with the rest of the world. And that clicks with this guy. That is something that in this, he's beaten down, they've all been running around fighting and stuff, so he's tired. And that tiredness lets him be more receptive to the empathy to figure out something about Rosa. So the next one is called Face Value Comics. It's specifically targeting autistic readership. So that's it's more unique than other books in this case. The creator Dave Cott was autistic, and he introduced Face Value Comics #1 in 2013. So one of the things that I really dig about this one is the visual depiction of autism. One in particular is that when he panics, when he has a problem, first of all, he will stim. Second of all, he's got a robot who's essentially his ABC device. And third, when he is panicking, the text flips upside down. So as a neurotypical person reading it, it's disorienting, right? And I get this disorienting feeling that lets me relate better to the character. You can see that the facial drawings, the facial expressions are very explicit, right? To make it more accessible to an autistic readership who might need help with that. Then there's another character in there who is nonverbal, and she uses an AAC device as a chalkboard kind of a thing. And those two connect with each other, and they talk explicitly about autism. So it has a little bit of a polemic feel. It's a little bit of an instructional comic book, but it also is valuable in demonstrating that. There's a new comic book called Chanter by Chris Carvalho and Edgy Zane called Chanter. And it's from Mana Comics, which is a Honolulu or a Hawaii-based comic book line. And he specifically has this character who's in a long line of magic users, right? That are matrilineal. So the mom, the grandma, were all these magic users. And she has this ability, but she is nonverbal. And the magical ability is conjured by doing chants. So what do you do when your power requires speaking and you are nonverbal? And the answer is, of course, as everybody knows, she has an AAC device. And so she ends up using the device to do her spells. It feels like a really cool solution and accommodation, perhaps a complication, to address an obstacle that would not be uncommon for certain autistic people. And he was inspired by a TV news story that he saw. So the inspiration to creators is also really important. And that's why I would encourage all of you, this is something I'll get to at the end, but to the extent that your personal stories, I keep hitting this thing, it's so small and visible, it's new, but I keep popping. To the extent, no, I would stand. I got the heebie-jeebies if I sit. And so telling your stories to the creative people in your life, whether they're professionals or kids or anything like that, share those stories, because those are the things that get in the heads of creators that then turn into autistic characters that can do the work of showing people who you don't even know how to interact with autistic people. So the family is in the superhero business, and as I said, grandma, mom, and kid. And so there's often generational differences in how autism is treated within a family that can be challenging. You know, if grandma is kind of hardcore, she might say the kid just needs to stop stimming or whatever and fold her hands and not express their anxiety. And mom might have a different opinion, and the kid might have a different opinion. So those things become part of the story of this comic book. Val from the Oja Woja is by Magdalene Desaggio and Jen Sinaj. It's kind of a Scooby-Doo-ish thing, like a mystery and sort of spooky stuff. It's a spooky book. She describes it, or they describe it as a horror mystery or whatever. The characters, it's this buddy comic with an autistic character. John Abbott from Rebels, these free and independent states, is a historical reimagining of things that were going on in the time of the American Revolution. And there's a character, John Abbott, who is an autistic kid, and he has this, he's not very skilled social communicator, but he's excellent at looking at boats and caring about boats and focusing on boats. And the boats at issue are warships. So he becomes very valuable to the American efforts to fight back the British, because he can see the British ships kind of come down the Delaware and identify how they were made, and then go to the shipyard and sort of talk to those guys. I don't know if architect is the right word, but a boat builder person. It's a terrific read. It's very well written. The other books in that series about young George Washington and how he behaved in Virginia prior to being the American general that we think of. It's a really excellent series. Adora from Adora in the Distance is Mark Bernardin's way of trying to connect with his autistic daughter, who is nonverbal. He as a kid was a huge adventure lover. He's paired up with Kevin Smith sometimes, like Batman and Batman, or Batman Beyond, or whatever it's called now. And he's a terrific writer. And he has created a Wizard of Oz style fantasy, I guess, where there's this magical world and the princess who has to achieve the goal to save the town. He's imagining that as the world that his daughter has on the inside, just like he had a world on the inside as a kid. It's a very sweet, personal book. And his opinion was that he said, I don't want to write a book about what it's like to raise a child on the spectrum, because I was not curious about me. I always felt that I was the least interesting person in this particular narrative. And I think that's a cool way of thinking about being a creative person writing about autism now, that there are lots and lots of stories about neurotypical parents with autistic kids. There are fewer stories about autistic kids and their experiences. So to reach out and try and find a way to tell that story is something that he was able to do. He also had a lovely little piece of it. That's why he put the girl at the center of the narrative. We are hopefully, these are quotes from the outside of the book, we're supporting characters in their stories. Hopefully we're there to help them on their quest, and not, as we all too often fear, hinder them. And then he says, lovely advice, which everybody in this room already knows, but if you're ever out at a restaurant or an airport or a theme park and see someone speaking a little louder than normal, staring at the world through their hands, thumping their bodies to the beat of drums you can't hear, consider being a bit gentler to them. Maybe they're deep in the middle of their own private. And I think it's that kindness that comes from having characters who are autistic in your pop culture works that get in front of kids, that can get in their heads now and stay with them for the rest of their lives. So, don't want you to think that there isn't big romance in these comic books. There is. Scarlet Salty from Archie Comics, I don't want to spend too much time on. It's kind of a one-off. It's kind of silly, but it's an autistic character, and it's got Moose sticking up for autistic kids. And that's one of those big comes great responsibility. Like, I don't know if Moose can handle a whole lot, but he's a big guy, and he knows you got to be nice to people. So he has this line: "They're not weird. They are autistic." And I wouldn't say that as an adult, but it's not shocking to hear it from a teenager, and that's the way they process it. And you know what? If that's the message Moose can couple together, it's a kind one. So I'll take it. There is another one that's fantastic. So this is a webcomic by Carol Burnett and Siobhan Keenan. It's in the Archie Comics universe. It's called Big Apple Energy. And Veronica, who's Paris Hilton effectively in this book, she is tired of dating movie stars and race car drivers and whatnot, and she just wants to be with somebody who's not famous or something. She wants to get more glamour, so she takes a job as a caterer. They need to have an environmental consultant. This boy comes in, Mr. Super Handsome. He's got a nice scarf and all that stuff, but he's awkward. He's a little strange. And she thinks he's cute, so she flirts with him, fluffs her hair and stuff like that, and drops names, and he does not respond to that. He's not picking up on social cues, right? And so, but he does like her, and it's clear that he likes her, and she finds that perplexing, because typically in her life, the only reason people had liked her was because of all this outside surface stuff, right? And now she feels a little vulnerable. And he doesn't do things. Like she says, oh, I'm hungry, I'm going to the diner. I'm like, oh, have a good dinner. And he's not picking up those sorts of cues. Fortunately, he's got a bro who helps him out, right? Who Cyrano's him a little bit and says, dude, you gotta go to the diner. Why am I hungry? Veronica's gonna be there. Well, that's what she'll eat that night. Oh, no, you don't. Oh, and helps him make that connection, right? So there's a confrontation where she says, you know, why are you being so cold to me? Why are you being so weird to me? And he says, you know what? I gotta tell you, I'm autistic, and I'm sorry, and now you don't have to, I'm not good at knowing what other people are thinking. And so, you know, now that that's how you know, you don't have to feel that, I'll walk away. She says, whoa, wait a minute. If you're autistic and you're not good at knowing what other people are thinking, how do you know I don't like you? And now you make a little seed of romance. And it was great. It's a really fun way. And the writer, she got her autism diagnosis during the process of writing this. So she knew she wanted a character who was not taken in by the typical charms that Veronica has, but by something else. And then as she sort of pieced together her own autism, she said, oh, that sounds like some of what I feel. Let me just make this character explicitly autistic. I love this story. So Megami Saitu from That's My Atypical Girl, I'm going to have to, did we have Bex?
Yeah, we'll see if we can do it.
Okay, we'll try. So Megami Saitu from That's My Atypical Girl is a manga about two outsiders who find each other. It's sharp elbowed and it's not for kids, but if you just walk through the slides, it's very explicit about autism and about the comorbidities of autism and the struggles with other mental health issues in part related to autism in Japan, and it's a terrific book. Then we have Adventure. I have to lace these because I gotta get to Bex. But Nuclo from the Avengers, he popped out and he's his character, and then 10 years later they said, oh, let's say that the reason he was not communicative is not because he was a baby man, but because he was autistic and he was misunderstood. So now there is this character out there, Nuclo, who's autistic. Hector Pullman was from the X-Men, don't know much about him. Chaos, Daniel Dash is also from the X-Men. You know, he kind of appeared, he kind of disappeared. He looks a little bit like he could be Scott Summers' son or something like that. Halfway from Alpha Flight was one of the characters who the original creator said she's autistic, and then over time they kind of forgot about that, so she became less autistic. Amistad Urban from the Milestone universe was not autistic in the comics, but was autistic in the Young Justice TV show, so maybe we can adopt that. Legion from the New Mutants was autistic like the first time he appeared, and then never again. They focused much more on his multiple personality disorder. And Nikki from the DEO from the Titans, she was, they thought she was autistic, and then it turns out it was like some interdimensional man who sort of fell into her body somehow, and so she presented as autistic. And the best / worst part of this, so she's not autistic after all, it was just that it was a side effect of having this interdimensional crap in her head. But they said, oh, now that we've separated these two people, let's get her some therapy, and I think she'll be better. And it's like, she wasn't having therapy before, you know, she was autistic, and you decided that, like, well, let's just let her struggle. The only other DC Comics character that was autistic and stuck autistic was Lucas the Hostage from Batman, from the 80-page giant about 13 years ago or so. And it is a short story that demonstrates the challenge of being a parent of an autistic kid when the two parents aren't on the same page about what kinds of treatments, or if treatment at all, is necessary, and how to handle the kid. The complications that can come from that. Silver Surfer has Ellie Waters, who is an autistic girl who's the chosen one. She goes off into outer space. Suddenly she's not autistic. I understand that he was trying. I don't particularly care for this particular representation, but it's out there. It has the fantasy of the neurotypical child, which I think is something worth avoiding in modern fiction, but I can understand the impulse for it. And then Slice of Life, I'm really in place with somebody who's so good, I can't believe I'm not giving them time. Marguerite from Invisible Differences. You know, email me and get this deck so that you can at least see what some of these books are. This is a French book about a woman who finds out later in life that she's autistic. Then With the Lights, a beautiful story about the struggles of a boy and his mom and their dad trying to figure out how to help their autistic child navigate Japanese school systems. It is a universal challenge in getting services for yourself or for your autistic loved one. David from The Ride Together is about autism in the 1950s, and 1940s, 50s, and 60s, so it's a little bit more historical, like what it's like back then. Oliver from Little Victories is sort of like what's it like to be a creative dad who has an autistic kid. And then Mia from Speak Up, let's see if we can get to Bex. So, well, you see if you can plug her in, plug them in. Bex is in London right now, or in England, and we were hoping that Bex would be able to join us here in person. She may not be able to. It's a YA graphic novel featuring an autistic lead character, and her quote was, "I was so sensitive compared to other people, and I felt ashamed that I couldn't be like other kids, or the heroes in the stories I read, who could take everything in their stride." The basic setup, as you can see from the image, there's a neurotypical girl who's in high school, and when she goes home, she writes and performs songs that go viral and become popular. So in sort of a Peter Parker, Flash Thompson way, the kids all pick on her, but then talk about how much they love this secret identity. So then, of course, this talent show, and her friend signs her up, and so now she has to decide, like, am I going to come out as LQ is the name of the character? Am I going to come out as L? And so, do we have Bex? Let's see, can we hear you?
Bex, can you hear us?
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Oh, so I'm so sorry I have been talking so fast, so we can get you some time, and it's not a ton of time. But I wanted to just ask you about what do you feel like you have learned about being an autistic writer of an autistic character once you released it into the world, as opposed to what you thought when you're home alone drawing it?
One of I feel like I learned the impact that it has on other people. Like, I get so many emails from autistic kids and parents, and like I've done a few school talks now, like some really touching school talks where I've gone to talk with other autistic kids about like my personal experiences, and they're just like, it's really sweet, like they're just so happy to like see their experiences and stories, and also kind of the negative stuff as well, like see their experiences of bullying where they can feel validated. Where in real life, those experiences tend to get brushed off a little bit, or people tell them that it's not as big a deal. So I think they really like having a story where they can just like see themselves properly and be like, yes, I do feel this way, and it's okay to feel too sensitive about stuff.
Yeah, and so as I look at the book, there are a lot of painful scenes in it. To what extent are those scenes where either somebody's frustrated or getting picked on, are they from your life experience?
Yeah, they were all based on my personal experience, like all the bullying stuff. But my bullying experiences were worse, but my editor said that I had to tone it down. Because kids aren't that mean, though, right? Yes, they are.
There's one part of your book, the relationship with the mother, that I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on. The mother in the book wants to be helpful and turns out to be frustrating and challenging to the daughter, and the daughter has a hard time expressing that to the mom until it blows up. Now, sometimes that's just being a teenager, and sometimes I guess that's autism. How did you navigate writing the relationship between your lead character and the mom?
I think I just kind of like, I feel like with the whole book, I just sort of wrote what I know. Although my mom isn't like this, but Mia's mom was based on a friend of mine and how her mom was in real life. So I think I just went with like experiences that I've seen in real life, like I just authenticity kind of helps.
How did you decide which parts of autistic symptoms you wanted to represent in the book? I was thinking about stimming, and your character has a chewy, I don't know if there's another word for that, and occasionally wears noise-canceling headphones. So how did you decide how your character's autism would express itself?
I never really thought about that before. I kind of just went with my personal experiences. Because obviously every autistic experience is quite different, isn't it? So I kind of thought I'll just kind of do what I experienced. Yeah, I didn't really think about it too much, but I feel like people would still relate to it, even if they don't have similar experiences, maybe because of the emotions that are coming through.
I love this book. My daughter really loves this book, and I'm curious what other works
have you been writing? I know you have a webcomic. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, I have 2 webcomics with autistic characters. I've got a romance webcomic, like a sort of like a Regency romance, a bit like Bridgerton kind of thing. But I wanted the main character to be autistic, and he's kind of like the prince that's sort of, because he's navigating royal life where you have to be like really sociable and go to parties and not have any faux pas, and he's just like really terrible at that. And then I'm doing a historical webcomic as well, but based in the French Revolution. It's about Robespierre, who was definitely autistic, and I'm kind of just exploring that and how that plays into politics for me, because it did not go well for him. And I'm looking into how being autistic kind of played a part in that as well.
So we're down to our last 2 minutes, so I'm going to do my outro real quick. The question is essentially, what can I do? You know, if you're here, you must care somewhat. I have 4 things. One is request getting these books into your school and local libraries, age appropriately, of course. Almost all librarians are cool if you give them a chance, right? And so take advantage of that. Number 2, sneak those books into your school and local libraries. Your librarian's not super cool. If anyone knows how to cut through red tape, it's autism parents. Connect with the people around you right now. Some icebreakers. Hi, what brings you to this panel? Hi, which of those books is something you'd like to read? Hi, are you local? Do you want to start a book club? Hi, that guy's an attorney. Should he really be dressing like that? And we talked about this before. Talk to someone creative in your life about what it's like to be autistic. That's the way stories get out. It doesn't do anybody any good. It's just living in your head. So talk to people. Talk to storytellers. Write to them. Write to Bex. And reach out to all of us after. Like I said, so let's go to the last panel. Let's have my email address at the bottom. You can take a photo. Just email me if you want to see the deck. There are many, many more slides. There are a little bit more data that's coming through there. I'm sure Lorraine and Bex and I would love to communicate with any of you after. We got to clear out the room, I guess, but we're going to be outside to chit chat to the extent that anybody wants to. I would love to. I really look forward to it. And I want to thank Lorraine for being a part of this, Bex for being a part of it, Jonathan Raphael, and thank you all for coming. Really, really appreciate it.